Now there's a good chance that you're making your calisthenics very, very hard for yourself, and there's a way that you can make it much easier just by adjusting the technique to match your flexibility. Let me show you what I mean with the handstand and then the chin up. So for the handstand, most of you are trying to handstand like this, but in reality, you should be handstanding like this. If you mimic the position standing, so squeeze the legs together, squeeze the butt and the abs, put the biceps by the ears, and notice how hard that is, especially when you try and look up. Look, this is really hard for me, and I can hold a straight handstand. But if we think about it, most people's position looks more like this with their posture, and when they try and take their arms above their head, they look like this and they compensate and they look like this. So this person needs to handstand more like this, create more space, and then suddenly they'll have more room. They'll find they're more efficient, so they'll be using less strength to hold the position, and their window of balance to how much they can adjust will be much bigger. So I can move around, look in this position, and it's much easier when I'm not demanding such a pretty line. Now let's look at the chin up in the same way. Now I need to be careful. When I was warming up, I whacked my head on this, so let's just move that over. Now you can try this with both a chin up and a pull up, but if I demand a wider position, so hands roughly shoulder width apart, I'm gonna have my thumb wrapped around the bar, so like this, and then I'm gonna try and get my chest to touch. So I can't get my chest to touch. But notice what happens when I demand less flexibility by bringing the hands together and cupping the thumb over the top. Now when I pull up, look, I can put my chest against the bar and I can even hold there for time. So by just modifying it slightly to allow for my inflexibility, I'm able to do both those skills. I can balance the handstand, I can get a chest to bar chin up. And that's not saying I shouldn't improve my flexibility and increase the quality of both of those, but trying to do something that I can't physically do is not going to be your best training, and it's going to be really frustrating. Exactly the same if I try and do a strict bar muscle up. If I go wide, it's going to be much harder to get my chest to the bar. But if I go closer, I can get up higher and get over the bar. I can't show you here because my head's going to hit the floor, but look at this video. So just by bringing those hands closer together, cupping even more, false gripping even more with a little bit of rotation, I can pull higher and make the rep. Again, I could make it pretty if I work on more flexibility and more strength of that new range. But to achieve the skill right now, I need to be realistic of where my flexibility is right now. Now let's look at the difference in something like a press handstand. So for a press handstand, if I'm flexible, I can stack much higher by bringing the feet closer to the hands, and that allows me to press up cleanly from there. But if I'm not flexible enough to get into that position, when I try and get my feet very close to my hands, it's going to pop me over in that direction and see how I collapse because my head and shoulders go too far that way. And because I don't have the weight behind me to counterbalance that, I can't press up. So the person that's tighter needs to be further apart with their feet and have their feet further away from their hands, more this position, a wider hand position, and even a slight bend in the arms. And now I can press to my uglier handstand, but I'm doing a press handstand and I can go back down again. Exactly the same for handstand push-ups. So if I make the hands very, very close and demand this position and a real tight line, it's really hard to get there. But if I open the hands up a little bit wider, allow the position to be still one segment, but a little bit looser in its position, then I can easily come down and notice that I can hold a conversation while I'm now doing repetitions of handstand push up because I've got much more room for error as I'm doing the movement, because I'm being realistic about my current mobility and positions of strength. Now what about the tuck planche? So the tuck planche you would think is an easier position when we're in a tighter ball. Now that makes sense from a progressional point of view or how much the lever arm is sticking out behind you, but the actual tuck planche position itself is going to be very different for each individual. Now I personally struggle with this position, so like a child's pose position where I'm trying to take the knees and the chest close to each other. This feels like my body wants to pop out from the position. It doesn't comfortably go flat into that position. To get the head on the floor is actually really uncomfortable. See, I can't get my head to the floor. So if I try and force myself into that position when I do a skin the cat, a planche, a front lever, a back lever, tuck handstand, a tuck press, it's going to take up a lot of energy just trying to pull into that real tight tuck. Where if I make the position a little bit looser, this is actually easier to hold than trying to pull up into a harder position. It might look like a tiny change. You might not actually be able to visually see a difference, but it does make a massive difference on the intensity and how much I'm working just to hold the position. And then we have the L-sit. So we got the standard pike version. We have the straddle version. Notice this, look. I can't get up from there. So I need a bit of a warm up to get into my straddle position. So if you just try going into these positions in a seated position first, so I'm going to sit here, try and get my back nice and straight, nice and flat in the low back and not point out in this direction. Notice how demanding this is. So if I then try and do the same thing on P-bars and try and go into that position, some of this energy that's being used here to hold the position is actually just trying to force myself into the straight legs. But if I bend the knees slightly, yes, it's an easier position from a lever arm, but it's also much easier from a flexibility point of view. So a good way to police that on your L-sit positions is to make sure that the knee stays higher than the hip crease, so it doesn't go down lower, and then you just straighten the legs as much as you can. But you're going to run into a limitation if your flexibility isn't that good, and that could be done in a straddle position, or it could be done in the standard pike position. Toes to bar are exactly the same thing. I need to be able to get my toes to my hands or to the bar with straight legs. But if I can't do this on the floor and physically get my toes to my hands because I don't have that flexibility to do it without raising the hips really high, and if the hips do raise high, your feet tend to go too far that way. So trying to fold and find your hands there is going to give you some information. Can you do it in a seated position before you try and do it up on the bar? Now, every calisthenics skill is going to have a different flexibility, mobility demand, and you can play around between the strength and the flexibility, but you just need to make sure that you're using the right technique, the right pathway that fits your current level. And remember that current level. We've got to be careful that as we progress, or as we go in the opposite direction, if we regress, so say we haven't been training or we haven't been stretching as much, we might put on a little bit of weight. We might lose some flexibility. So we need a different progression that fits our body compared to if we go in the opposite direction and progress. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions on this one. If you're after coaching, check out my website, www.paultwyman.com.au. I have my app and I offer online coaching. I'll speak to you in the next one.